So in this video today, guys, we're going to be ranking the 3 starter Pokemon in Sword and Shield. As with every single Pokemon game ever, there's always debate as to what is the best starter, and in this video, I aim to solve that question. So how we'll do the criteria to base this video is basically just look at each starter and its respective evolutions with a few different categories. We'll be looking at its overall moves, abilities, stats, but then also how it fares in early, mid, and late play. And while I think that all 3 are great, we should be able to come out at the end of this video with a definitive answer ranking the 3. So make sure to watch all the way through. Also, we are still running a giveaway for a copy of Pokemon Sword or Shield, so if you want to be entered into in that, just subscribe to the channel, watch the video to the end, and then comment what you thought on my final ranking. With all that said though, let's get into it. So first off, let's take a look into Sobble, the water Pokemon. Sobble's final form, Inteleon, is basically a special sweeper. He's got incredibly high speed and special attack, but the rest of his stats are fairly weak. He has a signature move called Snipe Shot, which does 80 damage and has 100% accuracy. Of the 3 starter special moves, I gotta say that Inteleon has the worst. What its ability does is bypass draw-in effects like Follow Me and Storm Drain, which in the main game is pretty useless. Even in competitive, really not all that useful. So basically what you're left with is just a really good water sweeper. Overall, I really like Inteleon, but for a starter, I do find him to be frustratingly weak. That said though, he is so strong, he's able to one-shot a lot of enemies, so it's not an issue you run into all the time. Now, as for the early game, the first 3 gyms, Sobble is probably the starter that's going to give you the most challenge. People will often say in the original generation of Pokemon that depending on what starter you pick, that kind of sets the difficulty. And since the first 3 gyms are grass, water, and fire respectively, you don't really run into that issue, but I still think that Sobble gives the most difficulty. The problem is that your first gym is grass, so he is going to have a difficult time at the very start of the game when your team is most weak. And on top of that, he doesn't get to shine until the 3rd fire gym, so by that point your team is probably already a little more beefy. As far as middle game goes, if you went with Shield, you'll have a huge advantage in the rock gym, but really overall I didn't find that to be a very challenging gym regardless. Rock's just a bad type that's easily counterable. But in the end game, I do feel like Sobble or Inteleon is actually very useful. I'll make sure not to give specific spoilers about the end fights, but it is something we need to talk about for Sobble. Sobble's extremely high attack and speed make him actually very useful for the late game fights, but he's also very vulnerable. The Pokemon at the end of the game are so strong that he's very often being taken down in 2 hits or less, which is not ideal. Most of the time, he's either 1-shotting or 2-shotting as well, but for me, I found him useful, but also frustrating that he died quicker than the other 2 starters. And as far as the final fights go, his water moves are only super effective against 2 Pokemon. That said, he is the only starter which learns Ice, which can be a pretty useful advantage. So overall, while I find Inteleon to be a very fun Pokemon to use, I did find him to be a little bit frustrating as he's just much weaker than the other 2 options. He kills much better, but you have to use him a little bit smarter or he will get killed very easily himself. Now, the next Pokemon that I want to look at is the grass type Grookey. So Grookey is definitely the most standout Pokemon of the 3. Unlike the other 2 starters, he's the only one that isn't a sweeper and really is more so a tank. His final evolution, Rillaboom, is a real beefy boy. Not only has he got high HP and defense, he's got an insanely high 125 attack. And on top of that, his special move, Drum Beating, is super good. Like Snipe Shot, it does 80 damage and has 100% accuracy, but this move 100% of the time lowers the opponent's speed, which is one of Rillaboom's biggest drawback. His speed isn't great. But since his speed is only mediocre, after really even one of these, I find him often gaining the speed advantage. Now, talking about the early game, I honestly think that choosing Grookey is going to give you the most easy experience. Since you both are rock and grass type at the first gym, you're not going to have much of an issue as most of his types will not be very effective against you. With the middle form Thwackey, I pretty much took on the whole gym leader just alone with him. But what's really great is once you get to the second gym, the water type, you just absolutely devastate. His final Pokemon is a Dreadnought, which is Water Rock, and it's pretty easy to one-shot that thing even in Dynamax form. And then you have the third gym, which is Fire, and obviously the most challenging. But see, personally, I like this setup the best. With the first gym, you have no disadvantage whatsoever, and the second gym, you get an advantage. This gives you a lot more time than, say, with Sobble, where you kind of have to have your team sorted earlier. And by the time you're to the third gym, well, you're good to go. Throughout the middle game, again, I don't really think it matters too much what you pick. If you have Sword, you will have a Grass Pokemon that's good against the Rock gym, but if you have Shield, you'll be going up against Ice, which is not ideal. But honestly, either way, I don't think the middle game is really affected much by what starter you pick. Endgame, however, I do have a bit of an issue with Rillaboom. He is just such an awesome tank, but the problem is that he's grass type. That's my only complaint with Rillaboom. Being a pure grass type, he is weak to fire, ice, flying, bug, and poison. And even as the beefy boy that he is, that starts to weigh down on him a little bit. Now, as far as the final fights go, the grass typing moves are actually the best of any for super effectiveness. There's 2 Pokemon that he's super effective against, and then a third that he is 4 times. So that's really nice. Overall, I think he's good in the end game, but maybe not my favorite just due to his typing. And lastly, we have what I think is probably the most popular choice among starters, and this is Scorbunny. So as a pure fire type, Cinderace, the final evolution, is more of a balanced physical sweeper. Inteleon's speed is 120 and his special attack is 125, whereas Cinderace is 119 for speed and 116 for attack. So while he's not quite as good of a sweeper as, let's say, Inteleon, he's a little bit more balanced, and honestly, for a starter, that's kind of what I like. I want my starter to be able to take a shot and not, just die straight away, because he's usually my best Pokemon. The thing that really stands out about him is his special move though, and it's Pyro Ball. So this move is basically just Fire Blast, but with improved accuracy. Instead of 85% accuracy, it's 90%, which may not sound like a lot, but I think is noticeable enough. Being able to land 120s just consistently with this guy is really nice. In comparison, Rillaboom also learns a 120 move that does a 1/3 damage recoil, so for a really just dead out crazy attack, this is great. Overall, I'm a pretty big fan of Cinderace. So moving on into gameplay, for the early game, I think he is middle of the road for best choice. Your first gym will be easy, your second gym will be hard, and your third gym will be neutral. Again, I just think that Grookey's neutral, easy, then hard at the end is the best way to go about doing it. That said though, I don't think it's as bad as Sobble. As far as the middle game goes, again, I really don't think it makes a huge difference, but depending on your game, you will struggle with the 6th gym, maybe? In Shield, you go against Ice, in Sword, you go against Rock, so that's gonna be a bit of a detriment if you are against Rock, but it is going to be a lot more dependent on who else you choose. But as for the end game, I feel like Cinderace is probably the best choice. Not by a lot, but let's break it down. In the final fights, if you will, I'm trying to keep things vague. There's a few steel Pokemon that you go up against, as well as an ice type. So same as Grookey, there's 3 Pokemon that he's stabbed super effective against. But the thing that I like about Cinderace is he isn't so weak. Again, with Rillaboom, it just feels like every Pokemon team has something that's super effective against it. And while Fire may not be the safest choice, it's better than pure grass. And on top of that, he's just a little bit stronger, can take hits a little bit better than Inteleon, so I like him for that. Especially with Pyro Ball, I feel like he's just as powerful, but is a little bit more beefy. And overall, I gotta say that I think Cinderace is a really good choice. So with all that said, I think we've analyzed these 3 guys enough. Now let's get into the ranking. Coming in at number 3, as the lowest and I believe to be worst starter is, as you probably expected, Inteleon. To me, Inteleon is a really fun Pokemon to use, just one-shotting Pokemon after Pokemon, but I didn't really love him. He's a great choice, but not my favorite. Another criteria that I looked at was, well, what if you don't pick that type, so you don't have a water type? How hard is it going to be to find a water type to replace it? And due to the nature of water types, not very hard. I don't think you're gonna find specifically what Inteleon is, but there's still a lot of good other water Pokemon. From Generation 8, 2 good choices are Dreadnought and Barraskewda. But water being water, there's so many other types. You've got Galipsopod, Quagsire, Milotic, Lapras, Gyarados. It's really not hard to find a good water type, so not choosing Inteleon isn't going to have you really missing that Pokemon. So while a really fun Pokemon to use, his special move isn't that great. He suffers in the early game and is just a little bit too light for my liking as a starter Pokemon. On top of that, there's just a lot of other good water choices. So that then leaves us with 2 Pokemon. And coming in at number 2, it's actually going to be Scorbunny. Now, I think that Scorbunny is probably the most popular, but honestly, not the best choice. Solid early game, solid late game, overall just a really good Pokemon. The deciding factor for me, though, was actually down to alternatives. If you play without Scorbunny, will you really be missing that fire type? And to be honest, I think the answer is no. With some of the good new typings, you've got Centiskorch and Colossal, 2 really fun fire types. And if you're looking for something a little bit quicker, you can get Ninetales before the first gym. And you can even acquire Arcanine not too late in the game. So while I love Cinderace, what it came down to at the end of the day was I felt like I can go through the game without Cinderace and just not really miss him. He's good, but he's not special. Which, ladies and gentlemen, takes us to our number 1 spot, and that is Grookey. What I believe to be a very special Pokemon. Of the 3 starters, I think he is the most special, unique, and probably best to take. Perhaps maybe not the best in, say, something like competitive, but to make your experience the best throughout this game, I think it's Grookey. He can both take shots and nail them right back, making for just a really fun and enjoyable playthrough. On top of that, he's by far the best choice early game. And while maybe not the best choice late game, he's still pretty good. And then on top of that, you gotta talk alternatives. When it comes to water Pokemon, there's a ton. When it comes to fire, there's less, but the options are still there and they're really good. But when you wanna talk good Gen 8 grass Pokemon, it's like literally just Rillaboom. The main popular other grass Pokemon in this game is Eldegoss, which is just, it's not it. In Sword, you can get an early Shiftry, and in Shield, you can get an early Ludicolo, but again, still not Rillaboom. And on top of that, his drum beating move that reduces speed is amazing. So overall, I just feel like he's the most irreplaceable Pokemon of the 3, and for that reason, the best choice. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of this video. So first of all, thank you guys so much for making it all the way through on this one. I hope it was at least a little entertaining. And if you guys do still want to get in on that giveaway, just make sure you're a subscriber of the channel and then just comment down below what you thought on my list. Did you like it? Did you hate it? What would you do? Anything, whatever would be great. I'd love to hear your comments. And yeah, that's it. Thank you guys for watching, and peace out, you frickin' nerds.